Ever seen a video of a building collapsing and thought, that could never happen here? That reaction feels natural, and it's exactly what makes unregulated cities dangerous, because cities don't fall apart suddenly. They decay slowly, and when building codes are missing, ignored, or unenforced, the damage begins long before anyone realizes something is wrong. To understand what cities look like without building codes, you have to strip away the modern assumption that safety is automatic. Most people misunderstand building codes. They think of them as paperwork, delays, red tape, rules created by bureaucrats who don't understand the real world. But building codes are not theoretical, they're reactive, and every regulation exists because something already went wrong. A staircase height requirement exists because people fell and died. A minimum exit width exists because crowds were trapped in fires. Reinforced concrete standards exist because buildings cracked and collapsed. Electrical codes exist because cities burned. Meanwhile, building codes are not about controlling builders, they're about controlling physics. Gravity does not negotiate, wind does not compromise, fire does not respect budgets, and water does not care about timelines. Building codes exist to make sure structures can survive forces that humans consistently underestimate. When those codes are removed, the city does not immediately become unsafe. Instead, it becomes optimistic, and optimism is dangerous when it ignores reality. In cities without building codes, construction becomes a race. Whoever builds faster and cheaper wins. There's no baseline to meet, no minimum requirement to respect. This shifts the entire incentive structure. Developers cut costs not because they want to cause harm, but because the system rewards it. Thinner walls save money, less steel saves money, cheaper cement saves money, skipping soil testing saves time, ignoring load calculations speeds things up. At first, nothing bad happens. Buildings stand and people move in. This creates a false sense of validation. Builders point to standing structure as proof that codes are unnecessary. Governments point to growth as proof of success. Residents adapt and normalize small problems. This is how unsafe systems survive long enough to feel permanent. Buildings don't fail because of what you can see, they fail because of what you can't. Gravity constantly pulls downward, wind applies lateral pressure, temperature causes expansion and contraction, water infiltrates microscopic cracks, soil shifts slowly under load, vibrations from traffic add stress over time. In regulated cities, buildings are designed with safety margins. Engineers assume materials will weaken, they assume loads will increase, they assume environmental conditions will worsen. In unregulated cities, buildings are designed for the moment they are completed, not for the decades they must survive. This is where problems begin to accumulate quietly. Walls develop hairline cracks, floors sag slightly, doors stop closing properly, windows stick. People blame poor workmanship or weather. They don't realize these are early warning signs of stress redistribution. Buildings are systems. When one part weakens, forces shift to other parts. Over time, those parts weaken too. This process can take years, sometimes decades, and that delay is what makes it dangerous. One of the most common failures in cities without building codes is uncontrolled vertical expansion. A building is constructed with a certain number of floors in mind. The foundation is sized accordingly. The columns are reinforced accordingly. The load paths are calculated accordingly. Then someone decides to add more floors. In regulated cities, this requires structural analysis and approval. In unregulated ones, it requires confidence and materials. At first, the extra floors seem fine. The building doesn't collapse immediately. People assume it's safe. But the foundation is now overloaded. The columns experience stress they were never designed for. The soil beneath compresses unevenly. This leads to differential settlement. One side of the building sinks more than the other. Cracks form diagonally. Structural elements begin to bend rather than compress. This is how buildings fail without dramatic warning. When collapse finally happens, it looks sudden, but the failure began years ago. Another early sign of cities without building codes is uncontrolled density. Buildings press close together. Setbacks disappear. Alleyways shrink. Emergency access is blocked. Light and ventilation are sacrificed for space. This creates environments where problems spread faster. Fire moves easily between structures. Smoke has nowhere to escape. Emergency vehicles can't reach affected areas. Crowds have limited exits. These conditions don't feel dangerous on a normal day. They only reveal themselves during emergencies. And that's when cities are tested. Fire is often the first disaster to expose the absence of building codes. In unregulated cities, electrical systems are frequently improvised. Wires are overloaded. Connections are exposed. Circuits are extended far beyond their capacity. Illegal connections become common. All it takes is one spark. When fire starts in a regulated building, it encounters resistance. Fire-rated walls slow its spread. Compartmentalization limits damage. Exit routes are protected, and sprinkler systems activate. In unregulated buildings, fire moves freely, walls burn, ceilings collapse, staircases fill with smoke, and exits are blocked or too narrow. Crowds move unpredictably when scared. Narrow exits become deadly. Smoke disorients people faster than flames. Many victims never see fire at all, they just suffocate. This is why modern fire codes exist, and this is why cities without them experience higher casualty rates even in smaller fires. And even while fire is dramatic, water can be quiet. Without building codes, water management is often ignored. Drainage systems are poorly planned, foundations aren't waterproof, roof slopes are insufficient, and gutters are inadequate. Residents may experience health problems long before structural problems become visible. By the time cracks appear, damage is already extensive. Flooding is even worse. Without elevation requirements and flood resistance design, buildings absorb water. When rules disappear, people rely on observation rather than analysis. If one neighbor builds an extension, others follow. If one shop occupies the sidewalk, it becomes normal. If one building adds extra floors, it sets a precedent. This is social proof at work. Over time, unsafe practices become the standard. Anyone who follows safer methods is seen as wasting money or time. Cities grow through imitation. This accelerates risk faster than any single bad decision could. Buildings don't exist in isolation. They rely on infrastructure, water systems, power grids, sewage, and even roads. Without codes regulating load and usage, these systems are overwhelmed. Power outages become frequent, sewage backs up, and roads crack under excessive weight. When infrastructure fails, buildings suffer. When buildings fail, infrastructure is damaged further. This creates cascading failures that are difficult to contain. Unregulated construction is often defended as a way to make housing affordable, and in the short term it appears to work, but this ignores long-term cost. Unsafe buildings require constant repairs, fires destroy livelihoods, collapses erase generational wealth, health issues increase medical expenses, and the cost is simply delayed. In cities without enforced building codes, risk is not evenly distributed. Poorer areas become experimental zones. Unsafe buildings cluster where oversight is weakest, and disasters hit these areas harder and more often. This deepens inequality and creates cycles of neglect. The most dangerous thing about cities without building codes is that they often appear functional. Most days are normal, buildings stand, people live their lives, and nothing dramatic happens. This creates complacency. People assume safety because disaster hasn't hit yet. They confuse survival with stability. But cities are not judged by their best days, they're judged by their worst. At this stage, the city still looks alive, still growing, but stress is accumulating. Systems are strained and margins are gone. All it takes now is a trigger. A storm slightly stronger than usual, a fire in the wrong place, an earthquake that tests assumptions, a crowd larger than expected. Every city lives under the illusion that tomorrow will look like today, but cities are not tested on normal days. They're tested when conditions change. In cities without building codes, that test always comes. Not because the city is cursed or unlucky, but because systems built without margins can't absorb stress. The trigger is rarely extraordinary, it's often something slightly above average, a heavier rainfall than usual, a fire that starts on a higher floor, a gathering that draws more people than expected, an earthquake that doesn't even register as historic. What turns these events into disasters is not their strength, it's the city's inability to respond. When a building collapses on camera, it appears sudden. Walls give way, floors pancake, and dust fills the air. But collapse is the final chapter of a much longer story. Long before the failure, the structure was overstressed. Reinforcement was insufficient. What finally happens is not a new failure, but the exposure of all the old ones at once. This is why investigations after collapses often reveal years of warning signs. In regulated cities, these signs trigger inspections and interventions. In unregulated ones, they become background noise. People learn to live with danger rather than confront it. Nothing exposes the absence of building codes faster than an earthquake. Earthquakes don't kill people, but buildings do. In cities with strict seismic codes, structures are designed to flex. They sway, absorb energy, and crack in controlled ways that preserve life. In cities without such codes, buildings are rigid and brittle. They resist movement until they suddenly can't. This leads to catastrophic failure, and entire structures collapse onto themselves. What's most telling is that during the same earthquake, buildings constructed with proper standards often remain standing right next to those that fail. This contrast removes all doubt. In cities without building codes, fires don't teach lessons, they repeat patterns. A fire breaks out, lives are lost, authorities promise reform, investigations are announced, and public anger flares. Then rebuilding begins, and this is where the cycle repeats. Without enforced standards, reconstruction prioritizes speed and cost over safety. Damaged buildings are patched instead of redesigned. Temporary solutions become permanent. Unsafe layouts are replicated. The next fire follows the same script. Disasters don't just test buildings, they test systems too. Emergency response relies on access, planning, and coordination. All three suffer in cities without building codes. Narrow streets prevent fire trucks from reaching sites. Overcrowded areas slow evacuation. Buildings lack clear exit routes, and addresses are poorly defined. First responders are forced to improvise in environments that were never designed for emergencies. This increases casualties not because responders are incompetent, but because the city itself is uncooperative. In regulated cities, emergency access is planned into urban design. In unregulated ones, it's an afterthought. When disaster strikes, something shifts in the collective psychology of a city. People stop believing that buildings are safe. They fear sleeping indoors. They hesitate to return to their homes. They lose faith in authorities. This psychological damage often lasts longer than physical destruction. Children grow up associating their environment with danger. Adults live with constant anxiety. Communities fracture as people relocate if they can. This invisible damage is rarely measured, but it reshapes cities for generations. After a disaster, there's always talk of rebuilding, but rebuilding without building codes is simply repetition. When the same systems are used, the same failures are guaranteed. This is why some cities experience disaster after disaster in the same neighborhoods. The root cause is never addressed, but rebuilding becomes an act of denial rather than correction. Where there are no clear rules, power fills the gaps. In cities without building codes, approvals become personal rather than procedural. Connections matter more than compliance. Bribes replace inspections. This doesn't just undermine safety, it destroys trust. People stop believing that following rules matters because rules are selectively enforced. This encourages more violations. Corruption becomes normalized, and safety becomes optional. As cities grow without regulation, informal settlements expand. People build where they can. These areas are especially vulnerable during disasters. Floods sweep through low-lying settlements. Landslides bury hillside homes. Toxic exposure affects residents near factories. Because these areas are unofficial, they're often excluded from emergency planning and recovery funding. Disaster hits hardest where protection is weakest. Many cities technically have building codes on paper, but paper does not hold up buildings. Enforcement is what turns rules into reality. Without enforcement, codes become suggestions, and suggestions do not stop. This is one of the most dangerous misconceptions in urban safety, that having laws is enough. What matters is whether those laws are applied consistently and without exception. Cities without building codes pay more over time. Rebuilding drains public funds that could have been used for schools, healthcare, or transportation. Investors avoid unstable environments. What began as a cost-saving measure becomes an economic burden. Across different countries, cultures, and climates, the pattern repeats. The specifics change, but the outcome doesn't. This consistency proves that the problem is structural. Cities behave predictably when systems are predictable. After tragedy, you might expect universal support for reform, but resistance often increases. People associate codes with delays, costs, and control. They fear that regulation will slow rebuilding or price them out of housing. This fear is understandable, but it's short-sighted. Safety always feels expensive until disaster shows what neglect costs. One reason cities remain unsafe is that building codes are invisible when they work. You don't notice the fire that didn't spread, the collapse that didn't happen, the flood that drained properly. Success leaves no evidence. This makes it harder to build public support for prevention. People respond to what they can see, and by the time danger is visible, it's too late. Cities that break the cycle treat safety as infrastructure. They invest in inspections, they train professionals, they enforce standards even when unpopular. They understand that growth without safety is not progress. These cities still experience disasters, but fewer lives are lost. Recovery is faster, trust is preserved. Cities without building codes are not doomed because of fate, they're vulnerable because of choices. Every shortcut taken during construction is stored as future risk. Every ignored warning compounds stress. Every uninspected building becomes a potential failure point. Eventually, the system reaches a threshold, and when it does, physics takes over. When you see footage of collapsed buildings, raging fires, or flooded neighborhoods, you're not seeing chaos. You're seeing the outcome of a system that chose speed over structure, cost over consequence, and growth over safety. Cities don't collapse randomly, they collapse logically, and the absence of building codes is not just a technical issue. It's a decision about whose lives are protected and whose are expendable. That's why cities without building codes don't just look different, they behave differently, and when tested, they fail differently. So what do you think? Are building collapses and urban disasters unavoidable, or are they warnings we ignore until it's too late? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this video helped you see how cities are shaped, stressed, and sometimes broken by the systems behind them, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into how the world we build responds when it's finally put to the test.